My name is Liza Gentile, and I'm a proud JWU alumna and the Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Johnson & Wales University. Thank you for joining us for tonight's session, Take Control of Your Finances in 2021. We're excited to bring you this program to help you in tackling the sometimes overwhelming topic of finances. We are grateful to our moderator and panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their expertise and answer your questions directly. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. If you have questions for our panelists, please add them to the Q&A section. They will be answered at the conclusion of the program. The chat feature can also be used to message other attendees. I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Jaclyn Boichat, CPA, MPAC. As a native Rhode Islander, Jaclyn always knew she wanted to come back to work in this great state. After studying at Villanova University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in accountancy and economics, Boichat returned to Rhode Island. She started her career in public accounting with one of the Big Four firms while pursuing a master's degree in professional accountancy from Bryant University. After obtaining her master's, Boichat became a certified public accountant, CPA, and left public accounting to work in healthcare finance. She subsequently took a position with Johnson & Wales University and is currently an associate professor in the College of Business. Please join me in welcoming Associate Professor Boichat.
Thank you, Liza. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our panelists. Evan Lemoine, class of 2009 and 2010 MBA, is an experienced accounting professional with audit, tax, and advisory service expertise across several industries. He is a certified public accountant, a CPA, certified fraud examiner, CFE, chartered global management accountant, CGMA, and professional registered parliamentarian, PRP. Currently, he serves as the supervisor of operational audit at Hanover Insurance, where he oversees agency and external audits over the $300 million program business segment. He also is principal of Evan Lemoine CPA LLC, a niche CPA firm focusing on solopreneurs, small business, and not-for-profit organizations. Evan serves on the board of directors of several professional organizations, including serving as a president of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, Rhode Island chapter. Our next panelist, Devin Rainone, class of 2015, is an associate financial planner with SK Wealth Management in Providence, Rhode Island. He develops financial planning strategies and plans for clients that are comprised of estate, retirement, charitable, insurance, and education planning. Rainone also helps clients develop investment strategies, emphasizing proper asset allocations, and establishes diversified portfolios that are tailored to individuals' goals and needs that have been identified during the financial planning process. He holds the Certified Financial Planner, CFP, and Chartered Retirement Planning Counselor, CRPC designations, along with a financial planning certificate from Bryant University. He is a member of SK Wealth Investment Committee, Financial Planning Association, United Way Young Leaders Circle, and is an active alumnus with Johnson & Wales University. We look forward to a great discussion, so let's jump into our topics. So I am going to ask Evan to please start us off with the topic of budgeting, why it's important, how we can get started. Can you maybe introduce us to any apps and maybe some small changes that we could help utilize in our day-to-day lives to help us stay more on track with the budget?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. It's great to be able to be part of this discussion. Certainly, as we start 2021, I think we're in the month of January. It's new year, new me, as people look for new ways to sort of get on track. And I think budgeting is one of those certainly things that people look to or try avoiding, or when they do it, they're not really sure what exactly they're doing. So there's a lot of great reasons to try budgeting. It's something that I've always tried doing myself, just to try making sure there's enough savings, and that ultimately that I'm not spending more than I'm bringing in. So there's a whole bunch of financial objectives or personal goals that people can have when they're coming up with a budget. And when I look at some of the reasons, it could be whether you just have funds for a vacation. I think sort of starting off with that initial emergency fund, that was one of the first things I know after college I had looked to try creating is if I'm laid off temporarily, do I have something there to at least pay my bills and to sort of just have some sort of financial footing? Or if something happened to my car, do I again have the resources there to fund something that could happen there? But there's a whole host of budgeting reasons in terms of whatever you're looking to achieve. And I think the biggest thing is it does give you a lot of great discipline in terms of trying to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. And ultimately it does keep you accountable, because at the end of the day, you're comparing your budget to what actually happened. And if they don't line up, the reality is most of us that especially are using credit cards, all of your transactions end up getting recorded one way or the other. So you do know where your money is going.
Great. Devin, did you have anything to add? You just need to unmute yourself, Devin, please.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, a few things actually. And I want to say kudos to, Johnson & Wales for hosting this event, as well as, COVID continues to spread across the country, and millions of people are unemployed. It's a tough time right now, and financial planning or wellness is always one of those 2021, new year, new me, kind of what Evan had mentioned, things to improve on. So working in the financial planning world, I can say I think the success of a financial plan really holds true value to starting off with the budget and knowing what type of money you're working with, where is your money going from? Because before you can even, get to the goals of should I spend, should I save, should I invest, should I, give it away to charity, you need to do a budget first and foremost to understand, what the figures and what the income and expenses are going forward. For this one, I would say, I think for, all of these are really important reasons, and, we can definitely add more to the bucket and, besides all, these 4 reasons right here. But I think a budget really holds people accountable, because everyone's always like, new year, new me, and they never hold themselves accountable and to try and figure out, did I really achieve what I really wanted to achieve? And seeing the numbers, in your mind, sometimes just doesn't get it. And for me personally, and probably with Evan and maybe other people as well, I need to write down the figures and see them maybe on a spreadsheet or a piece of paper or something, other than just in my mind, oh, did I really save that amount? So I think budgeting is, the foundation of any type of financial plan, and it's really important. And before, I think that it was always dreaded as like the dreaded B word, and people didn't really even want to bother doing a budget because they always thought, again, in their minds, like, oh, I know this, I don't really need to do it. But I think with technology so innovative and, everyone living on, their phones and whatnot and their apps, it's a lot easier to do. So I think if you go to the next slide, Jaclyn, I think we have a few examples actually of how to just get started on a budget and, different ways of creating it in general.
Absolutely. Liza can put us on the next slide. Perfect.
Okay.
And I just wanted to jump in before we go to that slide, Liza, you could go back to that coffee slide. Devin, you had mentioned looking back and seeing what you actually saved, but it's also important to look back and see what you actually spent. And I think if we have 2 really great examples here with morning coffee as our first example. And if you spend $3 a day on a morning coffee, you would, over the course of the year, spend a total of just about $1,100 on coffee, which if you think about what you could make that same coffee for at your home, it would be a fraction of the price. So just not only looking back and seeing what you saved, but looking back and seeing what you spent and where you can make little tweaks and improvements. If you ask me personally, I would much prefer to have $1,100 to go on a vacation or to put in a savings account or to buy a larger purchase that I might be saving up for, as opposed to getting a coffee out every morning. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't treat yourself with friends once in a while, or grab a coffee when you're running late, or it's just a Friday and hey, you want a Starbucks, that's fine. But you can budget for that and appropriately spend that money without at the end of the year looking back and thinking, wow, I just spent $1,100 on coffee. We have another example too, just another small change you can make, a daily work lunch. And this daily work lunch calculation, I did this assuming that you're only eating out 5 days, you're eating out 5 days a week, 50 weeks of the year, and 2 weeks for vacation. But if $10, which that's probably a low, the lower side of a work lunch, but
It is, yeah.
Not even a salad.
I know it's barely a salad, but I was trying to be fairly liberal with that calculation. But that annual cost is $2,500, and like we said before, it's okay to go out to lunch, but maybe you should go out to lunch with friends only when you have a friend to go with, and it's a special occasion during the work week, as opposed to just saying, hey, I'm just going to leave my desk and go grab lunch. If you ask me personally, if you added that $1,100 from coffee and that $2,500 from the work lunch, I would much rather have that $3,600 to take a nice trip with, or to put in a savings account somewhere. And I'm sure a lot of us would rather have that money as well. So now I believe Devin was just going to jump into some apps that we have available, which I think was right before those. Perfect. Some budgeting apps and some spreadsheet ideas that can help us all get started with these budgets.
Yeah, I think the main ones that are known, I think everyone knows what mint.com is. And if not, I mean, it's a really interesting and cool budgeting app that you can use. I personally don't use Mint. And I've heard of You Need a Budget, and I think you need to pay an annual fee for that as well. But I've never used both of them. I'm more inclined to charge everything on my credit card, get the points, and then every single credit card provides an annual summary at the end. So that's how I track my living expenses personally. I think the main thing you have to do though is just make sure you pay off the credit cards at the end of the month, because if not, then your average interest rate, I think, on credit cards nowadays, I believe, is like 18 to 20%, which is astonishing to think about. And if you do miss credit card payments, I included a little figure to the left, the FICO score. And if you just look, I mean, 65% off the bat is just consumed of the amount you've put on your credit card, and if you paid, the credit card back. So off the bat, if you go with that method, just make sure you pay off the credit cards, because if not, then, I mean, 2/3 of your credit score are already, pretty heavily impacted by that. There's also spreadsheets. So for me, myself, I mean, I like to have my entire, annual cash flows on the spreadsheet. And then I just find the living expenses on my credit cards, and then I just kind of back into it and see, voila. I try and keep budgets very simple, very easy to understand and explain. And then also I included this thing in worksheets, and usually every single financial institution, like the Charles Schwabs of the world, the Fidelities, the Vanguards, if you just go to their websites, they'll usually have a layout kind of already presented and created for you. So all you have to do is just plug and chug the living expenses, and you can also use that as well. But I think at this point, there's no way, shape or form. I think in every single way, someone's going to feel more comfortable using an app. Someone's going to feel more comfortable plug and chugging an Excel spreadsheet or using some type of software as well. So, these are some ideas. And, Evan, do you have any other ideas for budgeting?
Yeah, so I think, so you said you're spreadsheet based, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see, I'm one where I still prefer having one of those applications. So I've been that way,
Right.
sort of working on either budgeting or recording what's going on since a very early age. And whether it's mint.com, I actually recommend YNAB to people that are looking to create a budget. I think it's a very intuitive program. So I love having the apps, because usually what ends up happening is what you need to do is go into them, and it's sort of just asking you to do, what credit cards, what bank accounts do you have? And it looks to import it. And then being the accountant, that I am as well, it essentially wants you to classify everything. Okay, here was this check payment. What was this? Was this rent? Was this utilities? Was was this the lunch out that you said you were going to be cutting back? Whatever, categories you have, and then you can at least assign them and look at it. And what I like with budget apps as well, in terms of categories, is a lot of them you can really drill down on your spending. And I know a big culprit for a lot of folks tends to be that dining out category. And maybe that's where you need to start breaking it down by breakfast, lunch, and dinner, because you might realize that maybe it's the breakfast, you're always going out every day for breakfast, and that's a big culprit. Or you might just find that most of your spending is on dinner because you're a lot more elaborate, or as some will find out, they just spend money for everything across the board. So there's definitely a lot of great use out of those apps. And the only other thing I'd like with YNAB as well, especially as we look at budgeting tips as well, is you can create your budget rate in there, and then at least you have that to compare. How are you actually doing to how much you budgeted? And I very much like YNAB for those that are really trying to look at creating something, and they're ones that are trying to hold themselves accountable. The budget software allows you to, if you make, say, $1,000 a month, it wants you to budget all $1,000. So what savings goals do you have? What, how much do you want to put towards lunch? And then you're able to measure your progress there. And I think that really works well for a lot of folks, is to know that every dollar that you earn, you have to assign it into a bucket somewhere. So that way, okay, you might have $500 in your checking account, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have $500 to spend, because there's all of these other things that you have budgeted that $500 might represent. And I think sometimes apps do a better job at that, because you're able to stay ahead of it, versus some spreadsheets, which tend to be a little bit more, looking back at what's happened.
And for those out there that are overwhelmed by the thought of an Excel spreadsheet or even an app, which I have to say, even as a CPA and an accounting professor, sometimes I think those apps are overwhelming. I personally like to look at a spreadsheet, and I use the simplest form that you can possibly have. But you could also just do it with a pen and paper, and you could do it on, what my recommendation would be is, if you haven't started budgeting yet, just think about budgeting and write things down. It doesn't mean that you need to follow it tomorrow, but just think about it and say, okay, if I make X amount of dollars in a month, and here are my monthly expenses, I should be left over with that much at the end of the month, and I'm not. So let me start to track what I'm purchasing a little bit more, and maybe do that for a few months. And then you realize, hey, I probably could stop spending money on certain frivolous things and have some leftover money at the end of the month, where maybe I could take a weekend trip with friends, or I could do something that I find more enjoyment from than, say, grabbing that breakfast sandwich every morning. So I would say start easy, ease your way into this budgeting process. And at first, that might just be opening up a Word document or an Excel document, or even getting out a piece of pen and paper and just thinking off the top of your head, how much do I take home in a month, and what are my needed expenses? So my living expenses, my grocery bill, my gas bill, my car payment, my car insurance, my cell phone bill, my internet cable, anything that I would say we have to live before going out. And then maybe that leaves you with $500 a month to go out. And now, at least for the next month, you're aware that that's what you have to go out with. Because I think a lot of times, and I notice this with myself even, you run into a store, and that dreaded store, Target, they get you every time. But you run in and you just think, oh, this $5 item, I need it, and I forgot I needed it, and now I'm going to buy it, and this $5 item, and this $5 item, and the next thing you know, you've spent $60 on these items that you needed. So if we're just a little bit more aware, we might take a second to think, do I really need to buy that? So start off easy, ease your way into it, and I would just recommend starting off with a month, looking ahead to the next month and seeing, I'm just going to start to track my purchases. And then once you feel comfortable, definitely one of the apps, or maybe a formal Excel spreadsheet, as Evan and Devin had recommended. So great. Does anybody have anything else to add about budgets before we move on?
The only other thing I just wanted to add briefly as well, especially if you're one with a spending problem where you always spend and you usually use a debit card instead, is many employers, you can set up another account to designate for direct deposit. So that can be very helpful for people if you don't want to see that money, and just to know that, hey, maybe there's $100 for your paycheck that is automatically going into this savings account. So that way, sometimes mentally, if it's in another account, you're not now thinking, oh, I have this money to spend. So I think sometimes it's even small steps like that that can really be beneficial.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have nothing.
Great.
I agree with Evan, actually. That's a good point to, have different accounts and, direct deposit for your paycheck. Yeah. A lot of people do it. It's simple and easy. I mean, keep it as simple as you need to, and, break it down into, small steps and build on from there.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. So the next topic that we are going to move on to, which is probably going to be our largest topic of the night, is debts. We're going to chat about our credits, checking our credit, identifying what our objectives are in terms of paying off our debt that we all acquire, student loans, mortgages, car loans, responsible use of credit cards. Should we be using credit cards? Should we take on debt, or should we pay cash for things? So this is probably going to be our largest topic of the night. So Evan, I am going to ask you to start off here
Sure.
with debt.
Yes. So I like this slide, at least just starting out, because we talked about trying to make some small steps, make some small changes to sort of grow, or to create change. And I think the bigger thing is people, you can make those changes and you feel like you're sacrificing, and then it's, what is that actually getting me over the long run? And it actually can, the more time that you have, that you're thinking out time horizon. As an example, if you were just saving that $2 on coffee, maybe it's not every day, and it ends up being $50 a month, and you're putting that, say, in an account where you're going to retire, and you're able to invest that and do that monthly, regularly for 40 years, you've only put in $24,000 into that account, but you've actually had growth of another $52,000 on top of it. And I think people, they put the 24,000 and they don't think of all of the appreciation that's possible. But as you can see with this graph as well, those small changes really become exponential, the more time that you have. So, regardless of where you are, in terms of your life, just making some small changes can definitely have an exponential effect. So just moving ahead then, okay, this is just another example using a shorter term example as well. If you had, say, $20 a month and you did a shorter time frame, same thing. You've contributed $2,400, but you would have earned $850 if you were earning 6% over 10 years. So, you don't have to throw millions of dollars towards savings or feel like you're sacrificing everything. Small changes that you can put towards the long term is really good. And that goes also towards repaying debt. So I think that to me relates, because maybe now the question is, you have an extra $10 or $20, should I pay that towards maybe some of my debts instead? And generally speaking, when I'm using a rule of thumb, I always use about 5%. I assume if I can invest anything, I can assume I can get a 5% rate of return or higher. Therefore, if I'm looking at debts that I have, if anything is higher than that 5%, I want to pay those down. I'd want to have debt, specifically the interest rate that you're paying, be as low as possible. So I like a site such as this, especially if you have a lot of things that are going on and a lot of perhaps student loans or other objectives. Maybe there's credit card balances you've accumulated. But what I like with this is you can add all these types of loans, and that does include credit card debts, because if you're not paying it in full, those have to be paid off over time. But what I like with this is you can then work on creating some sort of financial plan of how aggressively can you end up paying off some of those debts, and which style should you use. There's two different general styles that this uses. One is an avalanche method, and that means you want to pay the highest debt that you have and pay that off as quickly as possible. So if you have that $20 extra a month, you want to put that $20 on your highest debt. The other method just that's sort of out there as a snowball method. And that is, hey, you know what? I have one loan with a $500 balance. It's the smallest I have. For a lot of people, there can be sort of that mental satisfaction of just knowing, hey, I've now paid off that one debt. That frees up that monthly payment that now you can add to pay off other debts as well. So I think as we look at debt, and I'll let Devin add some thoughts here as well, but there's no right answer in terms of the way of handling things. It's sometimes I think it's a matter of what works best for you mentally, because I know so I'm fortunate where I don't have student loans, but that was sort of my question when I had student loans was, do I pay off all of my student loans first, or do I just pay my highest rate first? Do I pay, I had one loan that had like 0% interest, and it was one of my smallest balances, but I was like, you know what, smallest balance, I'll pay the minimum, because I'd rather pay anything where there's an actual expense to me. Devin, I'm not sure what sort of your philosophy there is as you're looking at managing debt yourself.
Yeah, I think I've always thought of basically it's more of like a psychological approach versus more like mathematical in terms of like the avalanche versus like the snowball, because mathematically speaking, I mean, yeah, it definitely makes a lot more sense to pay off the highest interest rated loans, because you'll save more over the long term not paying interest. But more from a psychological perspective, people just don't like having debt at all. So once they, get the snowball going and pay the smallest debt and then the second smallest debt and keep it going and going and going, they feel a lot more comfortable in the long term. But I can say that's exactly how we kind of approach, we have an extra, $1,000 or whatever, and should we pay down debt or should we invest it? And we usually just look at the rates of return, over a portfolio, composed of, how many, allocated of stocks, bonds, and cash. And we always compare the two. And if it makes sense to pay it off, and if we can't get that return from, I would say usually it just makes more sense to pay off the debt, depending on the rates of return and everything. But no, I think this pretty much does a really good job of explaining, the highest interest loans, mathematically speaking, it makes sense to pay the highest interest loans over the long term. So.
And Devin, so I used 5%. Is that sort of, I don't know what threshold you use sort of in your head in terms of, because I know we can't necessarily always get 5% in the market. So I'm just sort of just thinking high level, is there sort of a number that you have in your head for what you would rather pay off versus, invest?
Right. I mean, it really depends on what, a client's asset allocation is, because I can say, the S&P 500's return, like last year returns like 17 or 18%. Do I think that's going to happen this year? I don't know. Couldn't tell you, to be honest. But again, that's being having a client with 100% stock allocation, and that's extremely risky. So it really depends, on what the asset allocation is of a client, and if they're comfortable with paying off the debt. But I would say conservatively between 5 to 7% is what I've always used. But then again, it just depends on what asset allocation a client has.
Yeah.
So I think 5 to 7 is very conservative.
Great. And the professor in me is going to jump in and just clarify some things in case the audience is confused with your higher level financial jargon here. So we're discussing, and I just want to make sure that this is clear to the audience, we're discussing the benefit between paying off debt or taking that money and maybe keeping it as an investment. So just very simply, if you have debt that is a very low rate, so let's say 1.5%, 2%, a student loan that you got really lucky on, and you make small payments towards that every month, and is it worth it to take money out of your savings account or out of an investment account in which you're earning 5, 6, or 7% interest on to pay off a debt that has 1% interest? And a lot of times people have this feeling, this negative feeling towards debt. And we, the panelists and I were chatting about this last week when we all met. And we said that debt is not necessarily a bad thing, and people assume it's a bad thing. There are very wealthy people out there that have debt. They also might have the assets in an account somewhere to pay off that debt, but they're choosing to leave their assets in an account where they're earning a high rate of interest instead of pulling them out to pay that debt. And a very simple example that I want to give everyone is something like purchasing a appliance for your home, or any
Yeah.
type of small purchase, maybe $1,000. And I say small purchase because, something like a washing machine, a dishwasher, anything like that, that's say under $1,000. A lot of times we might think, oh, I don't want to finance that. I know they offered me financing, but I'm just going to take that money out of my savings account and I'm going to pay it off. I'm going to pay the bill. I have to be honest with you, I never do that. I personally just say, I'm going to take the free financing because it's free money that I'm getting. So now every month I make the payment on time. It doesn't mean that I don't have the funds to pay that off, but they just offered me free financing for 12 months. So what that means is I'm being offered an incentive, and every single month I'm going to take that, I'm going to make a payment towards that and I'll pay it off in the 12 months instead of pulling that money from my investment accounts in which I could be earning interest on. So it's like the opportunity cost of that money. Well, I'm taking it out of one account to pay for a debt, where instead I could be leaving it there earning interest and paying off the debt as I go along. Okay, so that's what we were talking about with the decision to pay off a debt rather to pay off a debt or hold on to that debt and make the payments. But just so that everybody knows, debt has such a negative connotation, and it really doesn't need to, because you can be a very financially savvy or wealthy individual, make very good decisions, and it's okay to still have debt. It's part of your whole portfolio of assets, investments, and debt, and that's okay. So I think now we should move on to the topic of renting versus buying, especially in this very hot retail, very hot market right now, real estate market. I think that this has a lot of people talking about the rent versus buy debate. So I'm going to ask Evan to start here with this rent versus buy chart.
Sure. So just high level in simple terms, if you're paying rent, all you're doing, let's just say your rent is $1,500, in a year you're spending $18,000, and after 30 years, you're 18,000, again, assuming there aren't increases, you're paying $540,000. So when we look at, not wanting to take on debt, we do think debt, taking on some debt can make sense. And the interest rates right now are ultra low. I mean, you can get a mortgage certainly for about 3%. So just looking at, one example of this, if you took out a $300,000 mortgage over that, with that 3% interest rate over 30 years, you're looking actually at a monthly payment of about $1,200 that you're making. And what you can see is after 30 years, you end up spending about, just $100,000 less to buy a home than you would if you were renting. Now, I know there's always other considerations beyond just that specific cash consideration, but it's a huge reason to buy. Now, the bigger question should be, so that just looks at one perspective, should you buy or rent a home? And I just looked at things here in Providence, Rhode Island. If you were looking at the average home price of about $275,000, and you were also looking at average rent for 2 bedrooms, which were about $1,900 when I was looking at this, you're looking at, if you're planning on staying in Providence more than 2 years, buying is cheaper than renting. So I think that just says a lot about the way the real estate market is in at least this area. You can certainly compare numbers that might exist in your areas just to see whether that makes sense. So I would be one looking, if I'm going to be in Providence for more than 2 years, buying is going to make sense. And then just looking at it from a slightly different perspective as well, if we go to the next slide, even if we took on a higher purchase price of that home and the rent payment was lower, let's say it was more of a comfortable environment for renting. Even if that's the case, the break even in this area is would be 6 years. So I think that just goes to show, even if interest rates were slightly higher, you end up being in a situation where, in this case, 6 years is what makes sense in terms of buying. So, if you're only going to be in the area for 2 years, in this case, I wouldn't buy. But in most cases, you're going to find if you're going to be in an area long enough, 5 years seems to be most common. That's when it's going to make sense to buy versus rent in this case. You will notice as well that I put about a 5% down payment in this case. So I know that's also a thing that comes up of how much should I put down. I'm one where I try, and Devin, I mean, I guess maybe you could add insight to that. I'm one where I'd rather, especially at a 3% interest rate, I'll put as little down as I could get, just to be able to take advantage of that low rate as long as possible. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think in terms of, I'll go back to the renting notion. I mean, a lot of it is A, flexibility, B, you're saving to put down a down payment on a home. And I mean, I think that's really the case with renting per se. And I also think with, owning a home, A, you get to say over the time, you're creating equity in the home as you're paying off the loan, that it's yours. B, there's certain tax benefits, which I won't go into because you have to attend in a few days a tax session that we're hosting as well. The JWU alumni session is hosting as well. And I would agree with that. I think putting down something in terms of just capturing, the lowest interest rates we've had in quite some time is more advantageous than waiting to put down a larger down payment if, that's going to take a while for you to save and accumulate. So.
Great. I've seen some great questions coming through in the chat. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to some questions and answers at the end. So I think we have time for one more topic. And I'm going to ask Devin to start. We're going to talk, our last topic that we're going to get to tonight is going to be about financial planning and investments. And specifically, I think a great place to start are with 401ks. So if Devin, if you could give us some advice about 401ks and investing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think with 401ks and 403bs, I think everyone knows the first and foremost, at least contribute enough just to get the match, because there aren't too many free things in life. And, if you can get the employer match, that's more, you're ahead of the game 100%. And if you think of it, it's 100% on, your investments off the bat. I think from a financial planning perspective and an investing perspective, I included, 3 different types of accounts. And generally there isn't a correct way to say you should have more one or the other, but, a taxable account, an example is an investment account, which pretty much, it's say you open an account at Fidelity or Schwab and, all the taxes you would pay on are just the dividends and interest and capital gains you would get from it. A tax deferred essentially is a 401k or 403b where you're continuously putting money in, the taxes are deferred, and, later on, once you retire, you're forced to take out the funds out and everything's taxable at that point. And then tax-free is basically, you're putting after-tax money. It's money that really hasn't been taxed. It's just basically after tax because it hasn't been taxed yet. Into the account. It's growing tax-deferred. And later on, if you meet specific rules, more for the Roth IRA, you won't pay taxes on the account. And the health savings account, and especially for COVID and whatnot, and healthcare expenses, an HSA I think is one of the most beneficial and underutilized retirement accounts out there. So this is basically if you're working and you're still working and you have a high deductible plan, and if they give you this option, it could be a very lucrative and beneficial account. And I don't know if we have time, but the reason why I say it's good to have a good mix of all these accounts is because I included in that slide that there's like a link that has the total U.S. debt of the country, and you don't have to click into it now. If we have time, you can definitely click into it, but if not, total debt right now in the country is around 28 trillion. So if I had to bet, $100 if I think tax rates are going to go up from here versus, lower, I would say they're going to go up probably. And with all the stimulus money that has been printed for the CARES Act and whatnot, it's more of a reason, besides the current administration that's been enacted into the office, the tax rates are going to go up. So if you can, the tax-free investment slide is probably the most advantageous and beneficial types of accounts you'd want to have right now. So. Devin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Only thing there is just kind of reiterate the employer match. Make sure that you're maxing out what your employer gets. So many people forget what that is. They contribute 3%, even though the employer might contribute 100% up to 6%. Assuming you have the funds, always max that out to that's one of the biggest things that I see people miss.
Right.
Could either of you give the audience any advice on what the mix between a Roth and a traditional investment account split should be percentage wise, and what your recommendation would be for that if it's allowed in their plan?
So basically, if you're working right now and if you have both a 401k option, that's more of like the tax deferred option. If you do have it available in your retirement plan, a Roth 401k, I would say it's probably a good idea to either have a good split, or I would say maybe go 100% in the Roth 401k, just with the notion that as you're continuing to work and you think you're going to be making more money over the long term and, paying less taxes now, I think psychologically that makes sense to a lot of people. Otherwise, the only reason why I can see maybe instead of, 401k or Roth 401k, it's more the Roth IRA and the IRA, which are basically just retirement accounts not offered through your employer. A traditional IRA makes a lot of sense if you have student loans and if you have one of those prepayment options. You need to lower, your income when you're paying back the loans on a monthly basis. And if maybe you don't have health insurance right now and you need to go off the healthcare exchanges and get them, I think that can make a lot of sense for the traditional IRA. But if you do qualify for the Roth, I would strongly recommend contributing more to the Roth. Just playing the tax games. And if you think you're going to be in a higher tax bracket as you continue to work, get taxed right now, hypothetically at a lower, or hopefully at a lower rate right now than you would over time. But there's not really a good mix. I would say either do one or the other, depending on your circumstances.
I usually always recommend the Roths.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it's the easiest for younger people if you're looking to start off.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Right.
Great. So does anybody have anything else to add about investments before I turn the presentation back over to Liza Gentile, who is going to now moderate the question and answer session that we have. I know we had some some questions that had already been sent in, but I've seen a lot of great questions come through the chat. So Liza, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jaclyn. And just so everyone knows, in the follow-up that we will be sending, I will include the slide deck, so you'll have access to any of the resources that were mentioned there. I know those are some of the questions in the chat, but keep the questions coming and we'll start getting to those. The first question, how do you feel about the Truebill app to track budget and expenses?
So I'm not too familiar with the Truebill app. I think at this point, any app, whatever you use, as long as you're starting the process of budgeting and creating those mini steps to eventually get to budgeting on a full-time basis, I think more the merrier. So if it works, it works. Why not?
Great.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that specific app either. I'm sure that they're all wonderful though, and they all, like Devin said, they all get you to the same place. So
yeah.
We have another question. Do you have any tips for first-time investors on what industries to look into for investments? Tech, finance, manufacturing?
If it's more like I don't exactly know if it's more individual, stocks the person is referring to, but I think more, I would say keep it very simple. Stay diversified, keep costs low, and rebalance on a yearly basis.
The only thing I would recommend, if you have no idea about investing or what you're investing in, the best thing that you can do for yourself without thinking much about it is to invest in target date funds. If you know your retirement should be in 2050 or 2040, all of the math, all of the working out of which allocation percentages, all of that's done by professionals, and you have a very balanced fund that you're buying just in and of itself. So you don't need to think about it annually, just keep contributing to it. It's a nice set it and forget it that if you keep investing in that 40 years later, I mean, you would definitely have a very diversified fund that you're owning.
Thank you. In regard to mortgages and debt in general, can you talk a little bit about a fixed rate versus a variable rate option if your credit is not good enough for a fixed rate?
Yeah, so I mean, a fixed rate essentially is, I think what the average right now is around 2.75%, I'd say. And for a variable, it's basically, it just resets after, a 5 or 7 year period. So I mean, with interest rates at all times low right now, if you can't qualify for a fix, you can get a variable. I'd say, okay, I guess, but I personally like things fixed. And if you can lock in a lower rate right now and not have to worry about, once it goes from a fixed to a variable rate. And again, with interest rates at all-time lows right now, I would say in a few years, my bet is they're going to probably be up from right now at this period. I'd probably just say if you can lock into a fix and call it quits, lock into a fix. But if you had to go with a variable, there's 5-1 arms, 7-1 arms. I think you just need to be careful when it converts from a fix or yeah, fixed to a variable rate or variable for a fixed rate.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say on that is if you're not planning on being in a place or you're thinking you're going to be gone and that after that 5 or 7 years, fine. If you're staying there longer than that, if that's in your mind, get that 30-year fixed.
Right.
So if you had multiple jobs, is it a good idea to roll over multiple 401ks into one IRA or to simplify the account management?
This is always a fun question because we've had clients that have, 401ks or 403bs all over the place. And always the common question is, should I, consolidate the accounts? And from simplicity purposes, absolutely, it makes a lot of sense. However, if the retirement plan, if you're rolling it over into a current, 401k or 403b right now at work, you need to look and see, A, if the retirement plan is good, and B, how are the investment options? Because they could be loaded with high expense ratio funds and not too many funds in general at all. So sometimes it makes sense just to leave it, but I would say for, consolidating purposes, it usually makes a lot of sense. You just need to, take a look at the investment funds and options and the overall employer plan at work before you do it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Can you speak a little bit about refinancing options for houses? I know as a group, we had a good conversation about this in our practice session, just some different options that are available for folks.
So my general recommendation, if you, if you have no idea where to go, the first place I think to start is with your existing mortgage lender in terms of just seeing whether they have anything, what their current rates are. Shopping for rates online is usually very easy to do. Often though, the rates that you do see online through certain sites aren't always necessarily the best, even though they seem like they're the best. I would definitely make sure you're shopping around and do try as well. A lot of your local banks and credit unions will have great rates, but they're not participating on some of these big sites that, a big Bank of America or a Chase, that they're participating in. So I would make sure as well that you're just trying to look at some of the rates that might be available at local banks and credit unions too, because sometimes they just give you, really a lot better rates than you might think of.
Absolutely. And also just something to consider, if you're in a current 30-year mortgage and you have a rate that's right now, say 4, 5, 6%, that's pretty high. You could probably keep your payment about the same and refinance into a lower rate, a much lower rate mortgage with a lower time frame. So definitely something to consider. I talk to a lot of friends and family that just think, oh, I'm going to refinance into a 30-year. And I say, well, you're already 7 years into your 30-year mortgage. So you have 23 years left. You might want to see what your monthly payment would be on a 20 or 15-year mortgage. And typically the lower the length of the mortgage, the lower the rate is. So these 2.75 rates that we're talking about, that's for a 30-year mortgage. And I anticipate it would be much low. I don't know how much lower, I haven't looked into it, but it would be lower than that for a 20 or a 15-year mortgage. So it's not always about, say, making a less of a payment, but it's looking at the long-term picture. If you can keep your payment the same, or maybe even just increase it slightly, but pay off your loan in 15 years as opposed to another 23, that's something to really consider. So we noted earlier that a lot of people are always concerned about a payment, a car payment, the mortgage payment, but you really need to take into account long-term effects of certain investment decisions, and lowest payment doesn't always mean that it's the best investment decision.
Right.
Agreed. And I think just to add to that briefly as well, that you need to look at sort of where you are. If you're closer to retirement, refinancing into a 30-year mortgage probably isn't going to make sense, when you're better off trying to work on making sure that that's paid off so you can live in retirement where you don't have this mortgage that's sort of overhead as well.
Thank you. Can you offer any recommendations on repairing bad credit or building better credit?
Yeah, I can take that. So, I mean, if you have for example, a lot of like credit cards and you don't know which one, to pay off first, you can consolidate all your credit cards into a 0% credit card. That usually it's around 0% for the first year. So that's one way if you really need to just consolidate all your credit cards and you're trying to get a better handle on it. and then working your way slowly to pay them off on an annual basis. You won't get charged with interest. I would say otherwise, I mean, it could just be the snowball method or the avalanche method, where you're paying the smallest ones off versus the largest ones. But 2/3 of your FICO score is if you pay off the credit any bill on time and how much you're charging. So if you can control those two factors, I mean, overall you'd be in a better shape than you were before.
And keeping track of the payments and when they're due. So either setting up auto payments or just jotting a notebook down, a notebook with this credit card is due on this month, my mortgage is due here. And so making sure that you're really staying on top of when things are due, because it's easy the time slips by and it's easy to miss a payment, and you don't want that to affect your credit. So I personally think one of the biggest things that one of the most helpful things people can do is really just get a handle on when their bills are due, and make sure that either you have them automatically coming out, or you have some type of a calendar system set up in your Outlook, whatever it may be, so that you are making those payments on time.
Do any of you have any opinions on investing platforms like Robinhood?
Yeah, and it's not going to be a good one, unfortunately. So I've never used Robinhood. I don't know, but it seemed like in the beginning they didn't have as many restrictions or actually, any regulations in place to help, mitigate all of these crazy tradings that, you would just hear terrible stories on. So I would say stick with, the larger firms that offer free trading, like Charles and Schwab, Vanguard, Fidelity. I think those three, I personally use those three, and I never had any issues at all. And from a a security perspective too, and a breaching perspective, I mean, they have really good internal controls. So God forbid if something gets hacked or stolen, they have a really good procedure. Because a few of our clients, unfortunately, that's what's happened. And everyone working from home, I mean, getting hacked is more prevalent than nowadays, unfortunately. So I would say Robinhood, maybe if it works for you, that's great, but I would stick with the larger firms when you're playing, with your retirement, your investments. I wouldn't play around with the smaller firms.
The only thing I'll add to that is Robinhood did set for the big brokers sort of the general tone of being able to buy. If you want to own Tesla and you have $5 to invest, you now can own $5 worth of Tesla. You're not going to own the whole share price now. So they did kind of set the ability to truly invest in companies to be, you can own a dollar of a company. So that fractional ownership, because it's not trading for $5 a share, but the fact that you can do that now is something that all the big players do. So I do recommend, again, sticking with a Charles Schwab or Fidelity, E-Trade, if you're looking to actually do any sort of trading. But I think for most people, trading in individual stocks is probably not your first priority. It should be making sure that you're looking to invest more or less in broad-based mutual funds anyways. Once you have time to truly understand and you sort of have that plan in place and you have sort of something going with retirement, if you have spending money that you would have been going out to the casino gambling, then invest in companies. But I wouldn't put your retirement in individual companies like that.
I think we have time for about one more question. Can you talk a little bit about some other options in addition to 401ks, since many companies are starting to discontinue that match given the current financial situation of the country?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on your income status and everything, but I would highly recommend a Roth IRA if if your income limits allow you to. And if not that, I would recommend a health savings account and an investment account. I would try and keep a balance of a taxable investment account, tax deferred account, or a tax-free asset, just to have a good mix. So I would say a Roth IRA or an HSA if you're comfortable with those, if you can.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And the only other thing is there's a lot of companies that do have great 401k plans. That's not to say, it's so we shouldn't suggest as well that all 401k plans are bad and therefore, you should go the IRA route as well. So there are a lot of companies that do have some really low expense ratios in the funds that they have in their 401k. And sometimes that, even though they might not be contributing, it still might be actually cheaper to just still contribute to that plan, even though, they're not actively matching it. It truly depends on what your plan options are. They are more limited, but for retirement, you don't need to have 4,000 options. You don't need to be investing in individual funds. You need something broad, and you need something that you can set it and forget it. If you have to feel like you need to manage it, or that you're going to lose sleep at night because it could go, up, down, or all over the place, that's not truly a long-term investment you want, and certainly not for your retirement.
Great. I have one more question, Devin. I'm going to direct this one to you because this is something we didn't get to in the presentation. Do you have recommendations about financial advisors in general? And maybe you can just speak to some of the credentials that folks can look for when they're trying to find a financial advisor. Yeah,
so not all financial advising firms and planners are created equal, I would say. So, I would say if you're looking for a financial planning firm, make sure they're adhering to the fiduciary standard, which essentially means they're legally obligated to put, your interests ahead of their own. I would also look for maybe a firm that doesn't get paid commissions to sell a product or push a specific fund at you. I would look for what's known as a fee-only firm. So my firm, SK Walt's a fee-only firm where we charge a flat fee upfront to develop a financial plan, and we get compensated based on the investments that we're managing as well. We don't sell any products or insurance products, or we don't earn any commissions at all. And I would say for the credentials piece, I have the CFP, which is adhering to the fiduciary standard. We have CPAs on staff, and we also have a sister accounting firm. So, I would say CPAs, CFPs, and CFAs, which is more of an investment credential as well. All of those have very strong standards they must follow that put their interests ahead of their own. So.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to you all. I'd now like to introduce Lori Zabata, our Director of Alumni Relations, to close us out.
Thanks, Liza. Thank you, all of you, for such an informative discussion. You've certainly given us much to think about and act upon in order to make this the year that we take control of our finances. Thank you to all of our alumni attendees for joining us this evening. I hope you found this discussion to be helpful. Managing your finances wisely is not just an important skill for individuals, it's essential for all public and private businesses. Right now, the College of Business at JWU is preparing students to take on a variety of roles across a range of industries. You can help support tomorrow's business leaders today with a gift of any amount directed to the College of Business in Providence. Not only will your donation help upgrade lab space and open doors to a new real-world learning experience, you'll also boost JWU's national rankings, bond ratings, and industry reputation. Alumni donor participation is a key metric in all of these evaluations, and as they grow, so does the value of a JWU degree for current and future alums. Gifts of all amounts count towards alumni participation rates, and together, our gifts add up to make a significant impact in the lives of JWU students following in our footsteps. If you're in a position to do so, please use the link in the chat window to support students in the College of Business. On behalf of our students, I thank you for your generosity. We sincerely hope that you enjoyed tonight's session, Take Control of Your Finances in 2021, part of the JWU Connects family of programming. For the full listing of upcoming events, including Thursday's session on tax preparation, led by Associate Professor Dawn Lopez, please visit our events calendar at alumni.jwu.edu. Thank you again for your attendance and have a wonderful night.